I am Chloe, and I am 30 years old. Just a few months ago, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally threw me out on the street like a bag of garbage on my own birthday. And while I was sitting there, staring at a cheap grocery store cake, my parents looked me dead in the eye and told me to empty my bank account for my sister. They literally laughed in my face in front of our entire family. But there is one thing they did not know. They had no idea I possessed a legal document that was about to turn their perfect country club lives upside down. And right now, the very same people who kicked me out are the ones begging me for a place to sleep. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their fake lives, please hit that like button if you believe in true justice. And do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Now, let's go back to the night everything shattered. "Happy birthday, Chloe," my mother, Eleanor, chimed. Her voice was painfully upbeat, carrying that fake, sugary tone she always used when she was about to ask for money. I was sitting at the end of our dining room table. Right in front of me sat a slice of stale, store-bought cake from Walmart. The wax from a crooked number 3 and a 0 candle was melting into the cheap vanilla frosting. I had just worked a 10-hour shift, my back was aching, and all I wanted was to go to sleep. Across from me slouched my father, Robert. He had one arm casually draped over the back of his chair, a half-empty beer bottle in his other hand. Next to him was the golden child. My younger sister, Mia. She was 28, chronically unemployed, and currently scrolling through social media on the brand new iPhone I had paid for. I cleared my throat. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but my voice came out remarkably steady. I looked at my parents. "We need to talk about the money. I cannot keep covering everything. I am trying to build a future for myself. I have been paying the mortgage here. I cover the utilities, the groceries, the property taxes. I need to cut back." My father grunted. My mother blinked rapidly, feigning innocence. Mia finally looked up from her screen, rolling her eyes. "You are acting like it is charity, Chloe," she scoffed. I stared right back at her. "It is charity." Mia laughed loudly, a sharp, grating sound. "Wow. Okay then." My father leaned forward, his brows furrowed as if I had just committed a mortal sin. "Then let's start with your sister's six-figure debt. That is the real issue here, isn't it?" The room went completely still. Let me give you some context. A month prior, Mia had crashed a leased Porsche she had no business driving, and she had blown through thousands in a cryptocurrency scam. The total damage was right around $100,000. And my parents expected me to foot the bill, just like I had footed the bill for her college fund, her vacations, and her credit card bills. "I am not paying that," I said quietly. "That is not my responsibility." My father's lips twisted into a vicious sneer. He slammed his beer down on the table. "You ungrateful brat. You live under my roof. You pay it, or you get out. Start with the debt, or pack your bags." My mother did not defend me. She just gave a disappointed sigh and muttered, "I guess we know where you stand, Chloe. You always were so selfish." I did not argue. I stood up, left the cake on the table, and walked out the door to go to my night job. When I returned from work the following afternoon, my stomach dropped. My belongings were piled up on the front porch. My clothes were shoved carelessly into trash bags. My books, my shoes, and the old laptop I used to study were dumped on the concrete. I walked up to the front door and inserted my key. It didn't turn. The locks had been changed. Pinned to the wooden frame of the door was a piece of paper. It was my mother's crisp, unmistakable handwriting. It read, "Consider what you have done." I stood there on the porch for a long time. The autumn wind was biting, stinging my cheeks. I did not knock. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. Something inside of me, some fragile thread of hope that I would ever have a real family, just snapped. And in its place, a cold, calculating calmness took over. I gathered my trash bags, loaded them into the trunk of my beat-up sedan, and drove away. I found the cheapest roadside motel in town. The kind where the carpet smells like stale smoke and desperation. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, opened my laptop, and I scheduled an email. The fuse was lit. To understand how a family reaches the point of evicting their eldest daughter on her birthday, you have to look back at 10 years of systematic financial abuse. For a decade, I was their personal ATM. I was 20 years old when I dropped out of college. I didn't want to. I had dreams, I had a partial scholarship, but my parents sat me down one evening with grave faces, telling me they were drowning in debt. They said if I didn't step up and get a full-time job to help with the mortgage, we would lose the house. Being the naive, desperate for love daughter I was, I sacrificed my education. I started working 60-hour weeks. I handed over my salary almost entirely. But a strange thing happened. While I was skipping lunches to save a few dollars and wearing shoes with holes in the soles, my mother suddenly had enough money to join the local country club. She bought designer handbags and hosted lavish HOA meetings at our house, serving expensive wine. When I questioned it, she would cry and manipulate me. "Chloe, sweetheart, after everything your father and I have sacrificed for you, don't you want us to be comfortable in our old age?" And then there was Mia. The golden child. While I was breaking my back, Mia was handed the world on a silver platter. My parents treated my salary like it was Mia's personal inheritance. When she totaled her first car at 21, I was guilt-tripped into paying the towing fee and the down payment for her next vehicle. When she decided she wanted to spend a summer backpacking in Europe, my father told me I needed to cover the electric bill entirely so they could afford her plane tickets. The inequality was suffocating. I remember coming home from a grueling 14-hour shift just a few months before my birthday. I walked into the house, exhausted to my bones, only to hear pounding music coming from my home office. I opened the door to find Mia and her friends throwing a party. My expensive dual-monitor setup, the one I had painstakingly saved up for, was pushed to the floor. Beer bottles littered my desk. The keyboard was sticky with spilled liquor. I unplugged the speakers and calmly asked everyone to leave. The next morning, my mother cornered me in the kitchen. She didn't apologize for the mess. Instead, she yelled at me. "You embarrassed your sister. Her friends saw you storming around like a maniac. You know, it is not just your house, Chloe. Everything here is shared." Shared. The word felt like a physical slap across the face. Shared like the mortgage I paid alone. Shared like the groceries I bought alone. But I swallowed my pride. I thought if I just kept my head down, eventually they would see my worth. I was wrong. The real turning point, the trigger that began my silent war, happened exactly 1 year ago. I had been secretly working on a business plan. I wanted to start my own software consulting firm. I had saved up a small amount and went to the bank to apply for a business loan. I sat in the loan officer's cubicle, my hands sweating with excitement. But when he pulled up my credit report, his face fell. "I am sorry, Chloe," he said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "With a credit score this low, and an outstanding default on a $15,000 personal loan, we cannot approve you." I stared at the paper. I felt the blood drain from my face. $15,000? I had never taken out a personal loan in my life. My hands shook as I read the details. The loan had been taken out 2 years prior, using my social security number, but the email address attached to the account was Mia's. I drove home in a blinding rage. I slammed the bank papers down on the kitchen counter in front of my parents and my sister. Mia didn't even look guilty, she just looked annoyed that she had been caught. She needed the money to maintain her lifestyle, my mother pleaded, actually stepping between me and Mia as if I were about to physically attack her. "Chloe, please." It was a mistake. She was young. She stole my identity. I screamed, my voice cracking. "That is a felony. I am going to the police." My father grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "You will do no such thing," he growled. "Family protects family. You are going to absorb this debt, and you are going to keep your mouth shut. If you call the cops on your own sister, you are dead to us. Do you understand?" I looked at my mother, who was nodding in agreement with him. I looked at Mia, who was smirking from the couch. In that exact moment, standing in the kitchen I paid for, looking at the people who were supposed to protect me, I realized something fundamental. They did not love me. They loved what I could provide. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an asset. And when an asset stops producing, you discard it. I didn't go to the police that day. I lowered my head, said nothing, and walked back to my room. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully battered me into submission once again. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. From that day forward, I stopped hoping for their love, and I started preparing for war. Every Venmo transaction, every bank statement, every aggressive text message, every gaslighting voicemail, I saved it all. I documented every single dollar that flowed from my bank account to theirs. I was building an airtight case, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And on my 30th birthday, when they kicked me to the curb, they handed me that moment on a silver platter. The motel room was dark, illuminated only by the blue glow of my laptop screen. The smell of cheap bleach and old cigarettes filled my lungs, but I had never felt so clear-headed in my entire life. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled The Truth. Inside were hundreds of files. I had spent the last year meticulously organizing my financial history. I had a master Excel spreadsheet detailing exactly what I had paid for over the last decade, the mortgage payments, the property taxes, Mia's car insurance, my mother's country club dues, and the fraudulent $15,000 loan. I also had screenshots of Mia's text messages bragging about spending Chloe's money on designer shoes. But my most prized possession was an audio file. Before I walked into the dining room for my birthday dinner, knowing my father's temper, I had hit record on my phone and slipped it into my pocket. I opened a new email draft. I did not write it with emotion. I did not use exclamation points or angry rants. I wrote it with the cold, clinical precision of a lawyer presenting a lawsuit. I outlined the financial abuse. I detailed the identity theft. I explained that I had been unlawfully evicted from my residence on my birthday because I refused to take on Mia's new $100,000 debt. Then, I attached the spreadsheet, the screenshots, and the audio recording. I populated the BCC field. I didn't just send it to my parents and Mia. I sent it to our entire extended family. I sent it to Aunt Sylvia, my father's sister. I sent it to Uncle Ted. I sent it to the president of my mother's beloved country club. I sent it to Pastor Miller from our church, the man who constantly preached about family values. I added 52 email addresses in total. At exactly 7 a.m. the morning after my eviction, I took a deep breath, and I clicked send. The fallout was instantaneous and absolute. By 7:45 a.m., my phone began vibrating off the nightstand. I watched the names flash across the screen. Mom. Dad. Uncle Ted. Mom again. I silenced the phone and went to grab a coffee from the motel lobby, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace. When I returned, I had 23 missed calls and dozens of text messages. The first message I opened was from Aunt Sylvia. She had always been the black sheep of my father's side, mostly because she saw right through his nonsense. Her text read, "Good for you, Chloe. I went through a brutal divorce lawyer to get away from a man just like your father. I always knew they were using you. I am so incredibly proud of you. Let me know if you need anything." But the real chaos was happening on Facebook. My father, in a desperate attempt to control the narrative before everyone checked their emails, had posted a long, dramatic status update. He wrote, "It is with a heavy heart that Eleanor and I must share that we have asked our eldest daughter, Chloe, to leave our home. She has been struggling with severe mental health issues and has become dangerously erratic and abusive toward her sister. We ask for your prayers during this difficult time. He thought he was so smart. He thought he could play the victim, just like he always did. But he forgot about the email. Underneath his post, the comments were a war zone. A cousin from New York replied, "Mental health issues? Robert, we all heard the audio recording she sent. You literally threatened to kick her out if she didn't pay me his debts. You are a liar and a thief." Another church member commented, "Eleanor, I cannot believe you let Mia steal her sister's social security number. We will be discussing this at the next congregation meeting." My mother sent me a text at 9 a.m. It wasn't an apology. It was pure, unadulterated panic. "Take it back right now. You are ruining our reputation. The club president just called me. How could you do this to your own family?" I didn't reply. I just watched their perfectly curated, fake suburban life burn to the ground in real time. They had spent decades building this facade of the wealthy, morally upright family, and it took me less than 3 hours to reduce it to ashes. But I wasn't done. The email was just the appetizer. I had a main course prepared, and it was going to be served cold. I checked out of the motel at noon, dressed in a sharp blazer and slacks. I didn't go back to the neighborhood. Instead, I drove straight to the local police precinct. I walked up to the front desk and asked to speak with a detective regarding felony identity theft and fraud. I was directed to Officer Davis, a no-nonsense man who looked incredibly tired. I sat across from him and handed over a thick manila folder containing the bank records, the loan application with Mia's IP address, and the written confession my parents had unknowingly texted me when they begged me not to report her. Officer Davis reviewed the file, his eyebrows raising higher and higher. "Your sister did this? And your parents covered it up?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my voice steady. "I want to press full charges. No mercy." Later that afternoon, a squad car pulled up to the manicured lawn of my parents' house. Thanks to Mrs. Higgins, the neighborhood gossip who lived across the street, I got a play-by-play of the entire event. She recorded the whole thing on her iPad and gleefully uploaded it to the neighborhood HOA Facebook group. In the video, Mia was dragged out of the front door in handcuffs, sobbing hysterically, her designer makeup running down her face. My mother was trailing behind the officers, practically pulling her own hair out. "You can't arrest her," Eleanor shrieked for all the neighbors to hear. "It's a family misunderstanding. We told Chloe not to make this worse. Please, she has anxiety." Officer Davis didn't even blink. He put Mia in the back of the cruiser and drove away, leaving my mother standing on the sidewalk in her expensive slippers, utterly humiliated in front of the entire cul-de-sac. 2 days later, my mother found out where I was. She didn't call. She showed up unannounced. But she didn't show up at the local diner where I used to waitress years ago. She showed up at a sleek, glass-fronted office building downtown. What my parents didn't know, what I had kept fiercely hidden from them, was that my software consulting business had not failed when they refused to help me. I had secured private funding. Over the past 3 years, I had built a highly successful company. I was the CEO, pulling in a salary that dwarfed my father's entire retirement fund. Eleanor stood in the modern lobby, clutching a Tupperware container of my favorite lasagna, looking completely out of place. When I walked out of the elevator to meet her, her jaw dropped. She took in my tailored suit, the confident way my employees nodded to me. "Chloe," she stammered, holding out the plastic container. I brought you dinner. Honey, please. You have to drop the charges against Mia. She's terrified. You've made your point. You're tearing this family apart." I looked at the lasagna. I looked at the woman who had watched me eat a cheap cake while demanding $100,000. "I am not tearing the family apart, Eleanor," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper so cold it made her flinch. "I just stopped holding it together. Take your food and leave my building, or I will have security escort you out for trespassing." She backed away, tears welling in her eyes, finally realizing she had absolutely zero power over me anymore. I turned around and walked back to my office, where a man was waiting for me. His name was Arthur, and he was not just a corporate lawyer, he was a shark in a tailored suit. Arthur slid a thick, leather-bound folder across my polished desk. He smiled, a glint of predatory anticipation in his eyes. "Everything is finalized, Chloe," Arthur said smoothly. "The paperwork is airtight. Your parents are completely oblivious. The question is, what do you want to do with the house now, Madam Landlord?" I looked at the documents. I thought about the locks they changed on my birthday. I thought about the trash bags on the porch. I smiled. It's time to send them an invitation they can't refuse. I thought the worst was over. I thought they had learned their lesson. I was so incredibly wrong. 3 weeks passed since my mother showed up at my office lobby with her pathetic container of lasagna. During those 3 weeks, the silence from my end was absolute and unbroken. I did not answer their frantic phone calls. I did not respond to the endless stream of guilt-tripping text messages. I blocked their numbers, their email addresses, and their social media accounts. But in a family like mine, a toxic system built entirely on appearances and community standing, gossip is the primary currency. I knew exactly what they were doing because Aunt Sylvia, my father's sister and the only person in that bloodline with a moral compass, kept me fully informed. My parents were in full-blown crisis management mode. To combat the severe and highly public damage my email had done to their pristine suburban reputation, they decided to host a massive family gathering. It was framed as a casual Sunday afternoon barbecue to celebrate the end of summer, but absolutely everyone invited knew it was a calculated public relations stunt. They invited all the extended family members, the nosy neighbors from the homeowners association, and even Pastor Miller from our church. The goal was transparent to anyone paying attention. My parents wanted to portray themselves as the deeply forgiving, endlessly patient, and loving parents who were bravely dealing with a deeply troubled, rebellious, and mentally unstable daughter. They wanted to publicly disown me, secure the unwavering loyalty of the family, and, most importantly, subtly ask for financial contributions to cover Mia's rapidly mounting legal fees from the identity theft lawsuit and the criminal charges she was currently facing. Aunt Sylvia called me late on a Thursday night, just 3 days before the event. She told me my father was planning to stand in front of the entire congregation of our relatives and formally declare that I was permanently cut out of the family inheritance. He was going to announce that I would never be allowed to set foot on his precious real estate ever again. He wanted a show. He wanted a public execution of my character to save his own skin. I thanked Aunt Sylvia for the information, hung up the phone, and immediately called Arthur, my corporate lawyer and wealth management advisor. I told him it was time to drop the hammer. The following Sunday afternoon, the weather was sickeningly perfect for a suburban barbecue. The sun was shining brightly, the sky was a clear, cloudless blue, and as I drove into my old neighborhood, I could imagine the smell of grilled burgers and expensive steaks wafting over the pristine, perfectly manicured lawns. I did not pull up to the house in the old, beat-up sedan they were accustomed to seeing me drive. I arrived in the sleek, black, top-of-the-line SUV my company had recently leased for me. Arthur rode in the passenger seat, wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, holding a thick, heavy leather briefcase that contained the absolute destruction of my family's reality. I wore a tailored navy blazer, crisp white trousers, and a silk blouse. I looked like money. I looked like power. And most importantly, I had absolutely no expression on my face. We parked right in the driveway, deliberately blocking my father's oversized, gas-guzzling truck. I walked up the familiar front path, the sharp sound of my designer heels clicking assertively against the concrete. The large wooden gate leading to the backyard was propped wide open, and the loud, overlapping chatter of about 40 people spilled out onto the driveway. I walked right through the gate without hesitation, Arthur matching my pace exactly a half step behind my right shoulder. The moment the first person saw me, the conversation died. The silence spread through the backyard like a shockwave. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on a massive stereo system. My mother, Eleanor, was standing by the large glass patio table, pouring iced tea into plastic cups. She was wearing a brand new, clearly expensive floral summer dress and, my eyes immediately caught the glint of it, a heavy gold Rolex watch. She saw me, and the glass pitcher in her hand trembled so violently that iced tea splashed onto the paving stones. Her face went completely pale, draining of all color. My father, Robert, was standing by the massive stainless steel grill, holding a pair of heavy metal tongs like a weapon. Uncle Ted, who had always been my father's loudest and most obnoxious supporter, was sitting comfortably in a padded lawn chair, holding a craft beer. Pastor Miller stood near the blooming rose garden, looking instantly and deeply uncomfortable. My father was the first to recover from the sheer shock of my arrival. His face flushed a dark, dangerous, angry red. He slammed the metal tongs down onto the side shelf of the grill with a loud, ringing clang. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked, his voice echoing aggressively in the sudden, suffocating silence of the backyard. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face on my property after the vicious lies you spread about this family. You are trespassing." I did not raise my voice. I did not shrink back. I did not show an ounce of the fear I used to feel when he yelled. I stood perfectly straight, squared my shoulders, and looked him dead in the eyes. "I am here to finish the conversation we started on my birthday, Robert." Uncle Ted stood up abruptly, pointing a thick, accusing finger right at my chest. "You ought to be utterly ashamed of yourself, Chloe. Dragging your own flesh and blood sister through a nasty lawsuit. Sending the police to arrest her like a common criminal. Family is family. You do not turn your back on your blood. You need to drop those charges immediately, pay the restitution, and apologize to your parents right now before God and everyone here." Pastor Miller chimed in, stepping forward and using his gentle, patronizing, deeply manipulative church voice. "Chloe, please listen to reason. Forgiveness is the path to healing. Your parents are hurting deeply. Your sister made a foolish mistake, yes, but destroying her entire future and her career over a little money is simply not the Christian thing to do. We are called to bear one another's burdens." I slowly turned my gaze from my father to Pastor Miller. I looked at him with absolute, freezing clarity. "A little money, Pastor? She committed felony identity theft. She forged federal documents. And as for forgiveness, I forgive them entirely. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I have let all my anger go. But forgiveness does not mean I have to pay their credit card bills, and forgiveness certainly does not mean I have to subject myself to their abuse." My mother stepped forward, her eyes darting nervously around at the large audience she had specifically assembled for this exact moment. She realized she was losing control of the narrative, so she instinctively decided to play her favorite card, the ultimate, suffering victim. She forced her voice to tremble and squeezed out a few pathetic tears. "We gave you absolutely everything, Chloe," Eleanor cried out, pressing a hand to her chest. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We clothed you. And you repay our decades of sacrifice by trying to ruin us in front of our friends. Your father is absolutely right. If you do not drop the criminal charges against Mia right this second, and if you do not pay off that car debt to fix her credit, you are completely and permanently cut out of this family. You will not get a single dime of inheritance. You will never, ever step foot in this house again. Now get off our property before I call the police." My father crossed his thick arms over his chest, puffing out his chest and looking incredibly smug. He looked around at the crowd of relatives and neighbors, soaking in what he genuinely believed was his ultimate, decisive victory. He thought he had just completely humiliated me in front of everyone we knew. He thought he had just exercised his ultimate, unquestionable authority as the powerful patriarch of the family. He thought he had won. I let the heavy silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at the sprawling house behind him. I looked at the freshly cut, manicured lawn. I looked at the expensive patio furniture. Then, I turned my head slightly to my right. "Arthur," I said calmly, my voice steady and completely devoid of emotion. "I believe there is a fundamental misunderstanding about who actually owns this real estate property. Could you please clarify the legal situation for my guests?" Arthur stepped forward, taking his place right beside me. He unlatched the heavy brass locks of his leather briefcase. The sharp, metallic click echoed loudly in the painfully quiet backyard. The trap was sprung. Arthur reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of crisp, meticulously organized legal documents. He did not look angry, nor did he look defensive. He looked exactly like an apex predator who had just cornered its incredibly stupid prey. He adjusted his expensive glasses, cleared his throat, and looked directly at my father with a gaze of pure, professional ice. "Robert," Arthur began, his voice projecting clearly and effortlessly across the entire yard, ensuring every single nosy neighbor and gossiping ant heard every syllable. "Let us review the financial history of this estate. Exactly 3 years ago, you and your wife severely defaulted on your primary mortgage. You were exactly 60 days away from complete and total foreclosure. The bank had already filed the paperwork, and they were actively preparing to seize this real estate and auction it off to the highest bidder on the courthouse steps." My father's face went from an angry, flushed red to an ashen, sickly gray in less than a second. He opened his mouth to speak, to yell, to deny it, but absolutely no words came out. A collective, shocked murmur rippled through the crowd of guests. Uncle Ted lowered his beer, looking utterly confused and deeply alarmed. Arthur did not pause. He continued, pulling a specific, heavily stamped document from the top of the stack and holding it up. "At that critical moment, a private wealth management firm stepped in and purchased your toxic debt directly from the bank. They paid off the entire outstanding balance in cash, and legally became the sole lien holders of this property. Because you consistently failed to meet the strict financial restructuring terms over the subsequent 12 months, the deed was legally and irrevocably transferred to that firm." "That is a vicious lie," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking in pure panic. She lunged forward a half step before stopping herself. "We pay our mortgage on time every single month. We pay it directly to Chloe, and she sends it to the bank. She handles the administration for us because Robert hates dealing with the online portals." I finally smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just checkmated her abuser. "I did not send a single dime to the bank, Eleanor," I said, my voice cutting through the warm afternoon air like a surgical scalpel. "I sent it directly into my own company's holding account. Because I am the sole owner and CEO of the wealth management firm that bought your bad debt. I own this house. I own the land it sits on. I have owned it free and clear for 3 years. You have not been paying a mortgage, Robert. You have been paying me rent as a month-to-month tenant. And you have been chronically late on those rent payments for the last 6 consecutive months." The absolute silence that fell over the backyard was deafening. You could have heard a leaf hit the grass. My father staggered back a full step, his legs seemingly losing their strength. He literally leaned his heavy frame against the stainless steel grille for physical support. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He knew exactly what this meant. He knew the paperwork was real. "You." My father stammered, his arrogant bravado completely evaporating into thin air. "You bought the house? Behind my back? With what money?" "With the money I made building a highly successful software consulting firm while you were busy telling me I was worthless," I corrected him sharply. "I saved you from being homeless and living in a motel. And you thanked me by treating me like an indentured servant, constantly demanding my salary to fund me as lifestyle, and ultimately violently kicking me out of my own property on my 30th birthday." Uncle Ted, clearly struggling to process the monumental fact that the niece he had just viciously insulted was actually a wealthy real estate owner holding all the cards, tried to rapidly backpedal to save his own relationship with me. "Now hold on just a minute, Robert. Did you really almost lose the family home? You told me your business was booming. Arthur was not finished. Not even close. He pulled out another document. This one had multiple sections highlighted in bright yellow ink. The financial situation is actually much worse than a simple foreclosure, Ted, Arthur said smoothly, addressing the crowd now, exposing the rotting core of my parents' fake lives. During our standard financial audit of the property and Robert's declared assets, we uncovered some deeply alarming discrepancies. Robert, just a moment ago, you loudly mentioned cutting Chloe out of the family inheritance. But as your financial records show, there is absolutely no inheritance. And there is no retirement fund, either. My father whipped his head toward Arthur, his eyes bulging. What the hell are you talking about? I have a 401k. I have been putting money in that account every month for 25 years. There is over $400,000 in there. Arthur handed the highlighted document directly to my father, who snatched it with trembling hands. You had a 401k, Robert. Past tense. But your wife, Eleanor, forged your signature on a comprehensive legal power of attorney document exactly 2 years ago. She has systematically and secretly drained your entire retirement fund through a series of offshore transfers and massive credit card payoffs. Every single penny of your retirement is gone. My father slowly, mechanically turned his head to look at my mother. Eleanor was shaking violently, her entire body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with the realization that her deepest, darkest secret was now public knowledge. Eleanor, my father whispered, his voice cracking, sounding like a broken, defeated old man. Tell me this lawyer is lying. Tell me my money is still there. I stepped forward, delivering the final, fatal blow. She used your retirement to buy Mia's designer clothes and fund her European vacations. She used it to pay for the exorbitant country club dues so she could pretend to be high society. She used your life savings to buy that solid gold Rolex she is wearing on her wrist right now so she could look rich in front of the neighbors. You are completely, hopelessly bankrupt, Robert. The only thing keeping you off the street and out of a homeless shelter was my quiet charity. And my charity officially ran out the night you threw my belongings on the front porch like garbage. The family dynamic imploded right there on the paved patio. It was violent, loud, and incredibly ugly. My father lunged toward my mother, screaming at the top of his lungs about the missing money, calling her names I will not repeat. Eleanor was sobbing hysterically, pointing fingers wildly at Mia, screaming that Mia had relentlessly begged for the money and forced her to do it to keep up appearances. Mia, who had been cowardly hiding inside the kitchen watching through the window, came running out and started aggressively yelling at both of them, blaming them for raising her to need expensive things. The guests were entirely disgusted. Pastor Miller shook his head in deep disappointment, muttered a quick prayer, and quietly walked out the gate without saying goodbye to anyone. Aunt Sylvia looked at me, gave a slow, deeply approving nod, and then turned and left. One by one, the neighbors and extended relatives abandoned the barbecue, rushing to their cars, leaving my parents and sister screaming at each other in the smoking wreckage of their own pathetic lies. I did not yell. I did not need to raise my voice a single decibel. I took the final, most important document from Arthur's outstretched hand. It was a formal, legally binding piece of paper, stamped by the county clerk. I walked over to the patio table, moved the pitcher of spilled iced tea, and set the document down flat on the glass surface. That is a formal, legally executed 30-day eviction notice, I said clearly, making absolutely sure they heard my voice over their chaotic shouting. You have exactly 1 month to pack your belongings and vacate my property. If you take so much as a light bulb, a curtain rod, or a doorknob that belongs to the estate, Arthur will immediately file a lawsuit for malicious property damage. Have a wonderful Sunday, Robert. I turned my back on them and walked out the gate. I got into the passenger seat of the SUV. As Arthur started the engine and we drove away, I looked in the side rearview mirror. The house looked exactly the same, but the vicious monsters inside it had finally been entirely defanged and declawed. Exactly 30 days later, at 9 o'clock in the morning, I sat at the massive oak desk in my downtown corner office, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city skyline. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a short, to-the-point text message from Arthur. The county sheriff's deputies had officially arrived at the house to enforce the eviction notice. The locks were being changed. I didn't drive over to the neighborhood to watch them carry boxes. I didn't need to gloat or stand on the lawn to rub their faces in their absolute failure. The harsh, unforgiving reality of their new situation was punishment enough. From what Aunt Sylvia told me over a long lunch a few weeks later, the move-out process was a catastrophic, deeply humiliating event. Because they had absolutely zero savings left in their bank accounts, and because Eleanor's massive credit card debts and the foreclosure history had destroyed their credit scores, absolutely no reputable landlord in the entire city would agree to rent a house to them. They were ultimately forced to sign a lease for a cramped, run-down, poorly maintained two-bedroom apartment in a very dangerous part of town, right next to a busy, noisy highway overpass. The social fallout within their precious community was just as severe, if not worse. When the elite country club board of directors inevitably caught wind of the financial fraud, the police visits, and the impending bankruptcy, my mother's highly prized membership was immediately and permanently revoked. She received a cold, formal letter in the mail banning her from the premises. She was instantly blacklisted from every single social circle she had spent the last 2 decades obsessively trying to impress. The women she thought were her dearest friends stopped returning her calls and crossed the street at the supermarket to avoid her. My father's massive, fragile ego was completely, irreparably shattered. The horrifying realization that he had been entirely financially dependent on the eldest daughter he so openly despised, combined with the agonizing truth that his wife had systematically stolen his entire retirement fund right out from under his nose, broke his spirit completely. They were actively talking to aggressive divorce lawyers, screaming at each other daily over the few cheap, meaningless possessions they had left, trying to figure out how to split a massive pile of debt. As for Mia, the precious golden child finally had a brutal, head-on collision with the real world. Because I absolutely refused to drop the felony charges under any circumstances, she was eventually convicted and handed a permanent criminal record. No corporate office, no bank, and no reputable retail store would ever hire someone with a documented felony conviction for identity theft and financial fraud. Her expensive, private university communications degree was completely useless. Her vast network of superficial friends, the ones who used to drink my expensive beer and trash my home office while laughing at me, entirely vanished into thin air the exact moment she could no longer afford to buy the rounds of drinks or host the parties. 2 months after the eviction was finalized, the universe decided to orchestrate one final, poetic meeting. I was driving back into the city from a deeply relaxing weekend hiking trip in the mountains with my boyfriend, Ethan. We stopped at a random, slightly dingy gas station near the interstate highway to fill up the tank and grab some cold water. I pushed through the heavy sliding glass doors, walked to the back cooler, grabbed 2 bottles of water, and walked up to the front counter, placing them on the worn rubber mat. I looked up at the cashier. It was Mia. She was wearing a hideous, brightly colored polyester uniform polo shirt that was clearly 2 sizes too big for her thin frame. Her hair, which used to be perfectly styled and highlighted every 4 weeks at a high-end salon, was tied back in a messy, greasy bun. There were deep, dark circles under her eyes, and her nails were chipped and unmanicured. The cheap plastic name tag pinned crookedly to her chest clearly said trainee. She looked up, and her hands completely stopped hovering over the keys of the cash register. She looked at my expensive, high-performance hiking gear. She looked past me, out the large front window, and saw Ethan calmly pumping premium gas into a very expensive, brand-new luxury vehicle. Her face contorted into an ugly, familiar mixture of sheer exhaustion and deep, venomous resentment. She grabbed the scanner and scanned the barcodes on the water bottles aggressively, almost slamming them back onto the counter. "You know, you really ruined absolutely everything," Mia muttered under her breath, refusing to make eye contact, keeping her eyes locked firmly on the glowing register screen. Mom and Dad are getting a nasty divorce. We live in an absolute dump that smells like mold. I have to work the graveyard shift at this pathetic place just to pay my court-mandated restitution fees and my probation officer. You completely destroyed this family. I pulled out my sleek metal credit card and tapped it against the payment terminal. I waited for the machine to beep. I took the printed receipt. I looked her directly in the eyes. I felt absolutely no anger. I felt no sorrow. I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness regarding her existence. You are gravely mistaking me cleaning up my own life for ruining yours, Mia, I said calmly, my voice perfectly level. I didn't steal your identity and commit federal wire fraud. I didn't crash your leased sports car while driving recklessly. I didn't forge Dad's signature to steal his retirement. You and Mom did those things. I just finally stopped paying for your mistakes. She opened her mouth, her face turning red, preparing to launch into another pathetic argument, another attempt to play the victim. But I didn't stay to listen to a single word of it. I took my cold water, turned around, walked out the glass doors, and got into the passenger seat of the car. Ethan smiled warmly at me, asked if I was ready to go home to our place, and I said yes. As we pulled out of the gas station and onto the highway, I didn't look back. I never saw Mia, or my parents, ever again. Healing from decades of systemic familial abuse is not a magical, instantaneous overnight process. You don't just win a massive legal battle, drop the microphone, walk away from the explosion, and suddenly feel perfectly fine and whole. The harsh truth is, walking away from a highly dysfunctional family, even when it is absolutely the right thing to do, leaves a massive, echoing void in your chest for a long time. For the first 6 months after the eviction, I committed myself to intense therapy, going twice a week. My therapist, Dr. Sarah, a brilliant woman who specialized in family trauma, patiently helped me unpack a lifetime of deep-seated psychological manipulation. She gave a clinical name to exactly what I had experienced: parentification. I was a child who had been systematically forced by selfish parents to take on the heavy emotional and massive financial responsibilities of the adults in the room. Dr. Sarah helped me realize that my fierce, almost aggressive independence was actually a deeply ingrained trauma response. I had to slowly, painfully learn that it was actually okay to trust people, that I didn't have to constantly buy affection with a salary or acts of service, and that setting a firm, unyielding boundary does not make you a bad, selfish, or ungrateful person. It makes you a healthy adult. With my mind finally clear of the constant, draining anxiety of supporting 3 adults, I channeled all my newly freed energy into expanding my company. Business absolutely boomed. But far more importantly than the profit margins, I finally had the resources to start a dedicated scholarship fund under my company's corporate umbrella. It was specifically designed and strictly reserved for young women who were being forced to drop out of their college programs due to severe financial hardship or lack of support in their own families. I wanted to give them the crucial second chance that I had been forced to fight so desperately hard to give myself. I also, for the first time in my 30 years of life, learned what a real, healthy, supportive romantic relationship actually looked like. Ethan didn't need my money to validate his ego. He didn't ask me to solve his endless manufactured crises. He genuinely asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. He cooked dinner when I had to work late at the office. He deeply respected my boundaries, and when I finally sat down and told him the entire, ugly truth about my past and what I had done to my family, he didn't judge me or call me cold-hearted. He just reached across the table, held my hand tightly, and told me he was incredibly proud of my strength. Thanksgiving came around that first year. For the first time in my entire life, I did not spend the holiday walking carefully on eggshells. I did not spend 3 exhausting days cooking a massive, expensive turkey for ungrateful people who would do nothing but complain about the seasoning and criticize my life choices. I spent the holiday at Ethan's family home in the countryside. His mother, a warm, genuine woman, hugged me tightly at the door. His father poured me a generous glass of excellent wine. We sat around a big, slightly messy, loudly joyful table, laughing until our sides hurt, telling embarrassing stories, and truly enjoying each other's company without any hidden agendas. They looked at me, they smiled, they called me family, and for the very first time in my life, the word did not feel like a heavy steel trap closing around my ankle. It felt like a warm blanket. The second week of December, right before Christmas, I received a thick, cream-colored envelope in the mail. The return address belonged to my godmother, a woman who had remained completely, frustratingly silent during the entire explosive ordeal. I sat on my sofa and opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a beautiful card and a long, handwritten note. It read, "My dearest Chloe, I am writing this because I am so deeply, profoundly sorry that I never intervened when you were younger. I saw exactly what Eleanor and Robert were doing to you. I saw them draining your youth and your spirit, and I was simply too much of a coward to stand up and stop it. I didn't want to cause drama. You deserved so much better from all the adults in your life. But I want you to know that I am so incredibly proud that you finally stood up and claimed the beautiful life you always deserved. Do not ever look back. Keep shining your light." I sat alone on my living room couch, reading that note over and over again, and I finally cried. I sobbed until my chest physically ached. But I didn't cry out of sadness, and I didn't cry out of regret. I cried because, after 30 long, agonizing years of feeling invisible and used, I finally felt completely seen. I finally felt understood and validated. When you make the terrifying decision to permanently cut off toxic family members, society and well-meaning people will constantly tell you that you will eventually regret it. They will loudly tell you that blood is thicker than water. They will confidently quote scriptures and say you should always turn the other cheek and forgive. But what they don't ever tell you is how incredibly, beautifully peaceful the silence is. My phone does not ring at 2 a.m. with massive financial emergencies that belong to other people. My bank account is entirely my own to manage. My home is a safe, quiet sanctuary where no one can ever yell at me or throw my belongings on the porch. I used to carry the massive, crushing weight of my entire family on my back, genuinely convinced that if I just worked a little harder, if I just gave them one more paycheck, they would finally see my worth and love me the right way. But love without fundamental respect is not love at all. It is just leverage. The exact moment I stopped being financially useful to them, I became entirely disposable. So, I built a brand new foundation for my life. A strong, uncrackable foundation that is not built on guilt, or financial debt, or the desperate, clawing need for parental validation. It is built on absolute peace. It is my life, my rules, my sanctuary, and I am finally the one holding the pen and writing the story. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my deeply personal journey today. If there is one crucial thing I want you to take away from this video, it is this absolute truth: your value as a human being is absolutely not determined by how much abuse, disrespect, or financial exploitation you can quietly endure. You are fully allowed to walk away from people who continuously hurt you, even if they share your DNA. Forgiveness is a beautiful tool for your own internal peace of mind. But access to your life, your time, and your energy is a high-level privilege that must be continuously earned through respect. Have you ever faced something similar with your own toxic family dynamics? Have you ever had to draw a hard, uncompromising line in the sand to protect your own sanity and your financial future? I read every single comment. Share your story in the comments below. And please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next journey of healing. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.